Gabby, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be with you. I love you already. We have grown to rely heavily on our protection mechanisms because since we were very young, that's how we survived. We have these parts of us that can feel so overwhelming, can feel like we get taken over by them, offer these feelings, patterns, behaviors, or beliefs, connection, compassion, curiosity. When you do so, this new energy starts to emerge.
How can we use this process if we feel like we're not where we should be in terms of our lives?
The self energy that emerges replaces that belief that you need something outside of yourself.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Liz Moody Podcast, where every week we are sharing real science, real stories, and realistic tools that actually level up every part of your life. I'm your host, Liz Moody, and I'm a best-selling author and longtime journalist. Today, I'm excited to welcome the absolutely iconic Gabby Bernstein to the podcast. Gabby is the New York Times best-selling author of Self-Help, alongside 10 total amazing books. She also hosts the hit podcast Dear Gabby. She was named to Oprah's Super Soul 100 list. She's just an absolute legend in the personal growth space. Self-Help distills teachings from IFS, which is a type of therapy founded by Dr. Dick Schwartz. He is a beloved former guest of the podcast. I can link that episode in the show notes, but she distills his teachings into a workable guide for anybody, regardless of the kind of access that they have to a practitioner. Dick Schwartz actually wrote the intro to the book. It's a wonderful book, and Gabby will share some of the practices from it today as she teaches us how to love the parts of ourselves in our lives that can be trickier to embrace. There is a lot of amazing information in this episode, so if you want some key takeaways when you are done listening, make sure that you head over to lizmoody.substack.com and sign up for our newsletter, which has action steps for each episode, as well as bonus interviews, meal plans, workout plans, and more. Gabby, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be with you. I love you already. I'm happy to be in your home. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's cozy. Okay, let's start off with, you've said that you were inspired to write this book because IFS so profoundly changed your life. So I think it could be really grounding for people to hear kind of in as specific of a way as possible where you were before you found IFS, and then specific ways that doing these practices have changed your life and where you are now.
Awesome. So I had been in therapy with the same therapist for about 7 or 8 years. And she really saw me through some very critical periods of my life. One, right around the time that I first got sober. I mean, it was like maybe 5 or 6 years sober when I first met her. And so she really helped me with my recovery. But most importantly, she was treating me when I remembered trauma from my childhood. So at 36 years old, I had a dream where I remembered sexual abuse from my childhood. And this isn't an uncommon thing to happen, particularly when women are going through big life changes. And it was for me when I was thinking about family planning and looking at my life from this perspective of like, I've got all this career stuff, plus I want to have a baby. And it was such a turning point that I was probably in that ripe moment for these sort of defense mechanisms to be dismantled. And that memory came through a dream. And so I was working with this therapist at the time. And one of the therapies that she was using was this therapy to really help me check in with the child parts of myself that had been so traumatized. And I didn't really know what I was doing with her in therapy. Fast forward maybe 5 years later, it was during COVID, and I was watching this YouTube video. And this man, Dr. Richard Schwartz, is on the YouTube video, and he's talking about this therapy that he created called internal family systems therapy. And he's describing the ways that you would use it. And I'm like, holy shit, that's the therapy that I've been doing this whole time with my therapist. I didn't know what it was. I didn't have a name for it. And finally, it all kind of just like the puzzle fell into place. I realized, oh my God, I understand this so much differently now. And I was more intrigued to get to really learn this model. Then I had my podcast in 2021. Dear Gabby became part of my work. And I invited Dick Schwartz to be the third interview on the show. In the minute that I met him, and you know this, you've had him on the show, he's such a childlike wonder. He's in his 70s, but you feel like you're with like a teenager. And his energy is just so calm, and it's self-energy. He's connected. He's clear. He's just an incredible soul. And there was this instant friendship that happened between us. And I looked at him and I said, listen, man, this is my gift, which is to demystify and democratize and to really translate big principles into simple form. I want to do that with this work, is what I said to him. And he said, well, great, that's awesome, but I think you really need to get the training. And with the blessing of Dick, I was able to be one of the last people who's not a therapist to go through the IFS practitioner training. And so while I'm not a therapist, I am trained as a practitioner of internal family systems. And I did hundreds of hours of training and level 1 and 2. And when I completed the training, it was clear to me that I was ready to write this book and really make a self-help book out of this world-renowned therapy. And for me, it felt like I had been given the keys to the kingdom, Liz, because this IFS treatment had helped me transcend and repair the trauma and restore and unburden the little girl who had experienced the trauma, retrieve her, heal her, help her know she's not alone, help her know that there's safety inside, and know that there's an inner resource inside of me that could really be that rock and be that stability for this little girl who didn't have that. That gift was my duty to share. And that's what I've done with this book.
What is your relationship to that trauma now? Like, do you think about it? Does it come up in your therapy sessions ever? Do you feel totally healed in regards to it?
I feel really healed. Really healed. I don't want to say it, but I did a lot of work to get here.
Mm-hmm.
I have walked my talk with regard to the steps that I teach and the work that I've written about. The book I wrote called Happy Days, The Guided Path from Trauma to Profound Freedom and Inner Peace. I wrote that book 5 years into my trauma recovery. And in that book, I shared about somatic experiencing and EFT and EMDR and IFS. There was a whole chapter about IFS, and that's when I was like, oh, the next book is about IFS. Because IFS, of all the therapies that I've used and all the spiritual practices that I've applied to heal the core wound of the trauma, IFS has been by far the most magnificent in the real undoing and the rewiring of my brain. I'm really pleased that you asked me that question, because I can sit here with you and say that I am really safe inside. And 5 years ago, I wasn't. 3 years ago, I wasn't. 2 years ago, I wasn't. And it's been this just incredible gift to become new.
I have so many questions about that. One question I have is, did you have to go through anything to convince yourself about the validity of your dream and your memory of that? And did you have like imposter syndrome around the trauma?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like feel they have trauma, but they're like, can I own this? Is this mine to, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think a lot of people walk around like, did something happen to me? Or maybe they have like imprinted memories. In my case, I had like sort of like visual, like almost like movie scenes in my brain, like the closet and the window and just these just eerie moments. I felt it in my body. You know, trauma doesn't lie. It's in your body. It's in your dreams. It's in your memories. It's in your reactions. It's in your triggers. It's in your DNA, and it's carried on even in epigenetics. It's just there's legacy burdens as we talk about in IFS. So I think that the experience of remembering was equal parts relief and equal parts terror. The relief was, oh wow, that's why I was a cocaine addict. That's why I was a workaholic. That's why I was a love addict. That's why. So that's why I've had extreme anxiety disorder. That's why I've been living in terror. It validated my life. I remember reading this passage from Peter Levine, who started somatic experiencing, and he said that trauma is the inability to be present. And reading that, I was like, oh, that's why I can't be present at the time. Well, that's why I can't be in the moment. That's why I'm constantly living in a state of hypervigilance. And this is why my stomach is always in knots. And this is why I can't put on the weight, because I just keep like, I can't eat, just literally living in a fight flight state. So it really validated me as a person. And in the same breath, it was terrifying, because you get thrown back into the trauma when you remember it or when you claim it or accept it. And also, it did take me quite a bit of time to accept what exactly happened. And there's so much shame in it. So that shame keeps you quiet and silenced and minimizes it. One of the things that happens as a trauma survivor is you're kind of just playing down the experience. There's a clinical phrase for this. I wish I remembered what it was, but where you actually just literally make up a whole other story about your life. I did that.
Yeah. So much of what you said is so important. I want people to internalize that, like, if you are feeling things, it is because of something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can say like, well, my childhood wasn't that bad, or like, do I really remember this? I don't know. But it's like, if this is showing up in your body, in your mind, in the way that you interact with the world, that's for a reason.
Yeah, I think that's actually why I love The Gift of Self-Help, my new book, because the practices in self-help are not pathologizing, just like IFS is non-pathologizing. So you're not trying to sit there and be like, I have trauma or I don't have trauma. It's just about becoming familiar with, connecting to, and befriending the parts of yourself that feel extreme, that feel out of control. If you've ever said, a part of me goes into rage when Zach does X, Y, Z, or my Zach too, we both have Zachs, or a part of me feels like I'm completely, you mentioned an anxious part that you have. We have these parts of us that can feel so overwhelming, can feel like we get taken over by them. So for me, for many years, it was this sort of belief of, if I don't do it, nobody else will. And that part would become so outraged, so flustered, so extreme in moments. It really affected the people that worked for me. It really affected my marriage. It really affected probably even my child, just being in that witnessing of that like overwhelm. And that befriending of these parts of ourselves, becoming curious about these parts of ourselves, offering compassion to these parts of ourselves is the crux of what self-help is. Because what we want to do often is when we get activated is just check out, right? We want to go pick up the drink or pick up the booze or go to the refrigerator. And in this case, the book is guiding you to check in instead and offer these feelings, patterns, behaviors, or beliefs that may feel overwhelming and extreme, to offer them connection, compassion, curiosity. And when you do so, this new energy starts to emerge, this new presence inside. You follow the 4 steps of the book, which I'll teach you, and you feel this presence of calmness come over, and you feel more clarity about why you've been acting out or how you've been being. You have a little compassion for the part of yourself that's been in this way. You feel a little bit of creative energy start to spark up, and courage and confidence and connection inside. And that new energy that happens just in a 1-minute practice of these 4 steps is your self energy. It's your undamaged, resourced God nature, Buddha nature, love within you. It's your inner parent. It's your inner healer. And that comes naturally.
I'm going to ask you to walk us through the 4 steps in a second. But first, I have to ask, you said that you couldn't have said that you felt healed like 3 years ago, 5 years ago. Your career, though, has been helping people heal. I'm curious if you felt any like imposter syndrome or dissonance in your career, and then what you've been still struggling with or dealing with yourself.
No, I haven't felt any imposter syndrome at all, because I've been really honest along the way.
Yeah.
I've just shared where I have been. I've written books about where I am. My teaching has always been grounded in the seat of where my soul was at in that moment.
I love that. I think people feel like, I don't know, like we're striving towards some sort of like perfection, some sort of like completely healed state. And it's like you can give so much to the world anywhere that you are, because where you are is such an important message unto itself.
Yeah. The one thing I want to speak for is that recovery is real. And it's a 1 day at a time scenario. Like I said, I've been sober 19 and a half years. So I've been on a very devotional, spiritual, and personal development path my whole life, but particularly in the last 19 and a half years. And in that time, the beautiful 12-step motto of 1 day at a time, which is everything, because you can be, 2 things can be true. You can be in extreme trauma memories and doing great work in the world. And you can be having really difficult moments and still have a little fun along the way. So as long as you're in the seat of recovery, as long as your intention is to heal, the one small subtle shift a day is exactly what's the miracle. That is the miracle.
I love that so much. Okay, walk us through the 4-step process.
We all have these protection mechanisms. We have these ways of being that are sometimes feel a little extreme. They can feel a little bit overwhelming. They can feel like sometimes they can manifest as anxiety. Sometimes they can manifest as control or addiction, or maybe you've said like, oh, part of me, it gets activated in these moments. And these are protection mechanisms, and they're there for a reason. And oftentimes when you connect to those protection mechanisms and you ask them how long they've been around, like forever, as long as I can remember. Because as children, we have these very extreme experiences of trauma with a big T or trauma with a small t. So maybe you were bullied, or maybe you were neglected, or maybe in my case, you had abuse. And these moments were so impermissible and so scary and so traumatizing. and we didn't have the caregivers to guide us to get to support and safety, that we numbed out, checked out, and began protecting ourselves at a very young age. So the little kid who felt like they weren't being seen, maybe immediately is like, I'm going to be a perfectionist and show everybody how perfect I am. Or in my case, where I felt so out of control became my protector. I've got to control everything to feel safe. I see you shaking your head. Oftentimes female entrepreneurs carry that same bond and that wound. Yeah. And so we live in these protection mechanisms. And so this practice isn't about going to the little traumatized, exiled part, because that's what you do with Dick Schwartz. That's what you do at IFS. That's where you go to therapy. In this instance, you're going to do a check-in with the protection mechanisms. So the anxiety or the controller or the addict, maybe not so extreme in the addict moments, but maybe the numbing out with the YouTube or the perfectionism, you check in with these parts of yourself instead of check out. So when you have an ability to notice, okay, the anxiety's there, I'm going to check in. Or the controller is here, I'm going to check in. The first step is to choose to check in instead of check out. So it's to choose to focus your attention inward and become curious, the second step. And that curiosity is just noticing, in your case, where do I feel that anxiety in my body? Or in my case, where is that control living in my body? How long has it been around? What do I know about it? Are there any thoughts or feelings or sensations that are attached to it? That's the second step, which is just becoming curious. And once you notice a little connection to that part of you, you'd offer some compassionate connection. And that's when you would say, what do you need? Asking the part, what do you need? And listening. And then giving it a little bit of breath. You'd notice the shifts inside, which is the fourth step, which is check for C qualities of self, because self, as defined by Richard Schwartz, is calm, compassion, connection, curiosity, courage, confidence, clarity. There's always one I'm going to miss, creativity. So there you go. So those 8 C's, you'll check in. Do I feel more calm? Do I feel more compassion towards this part of me? Do I feel connected? Do I have more clarity? Do I have a little bit more courage? And the self will always emerge. Because when you check in and you offer these parts of yourself that kind of loving attention, self emerges naturally. The steps that I've created are actually rooted in self-like parts, right? So it's choice, choosing to check in. Then there's the part of curiosity. Then there's the energy of compassion. And so that connection, compassion, and curiosity is self-energy. So just offering that attention inside gives these protection mechanisms a chance to be seen and heard. And what are these protection mechanisms? Liz, they're little kids inside of us, right? So when a little kid is distraught, what does a little kid need? Calm, connection, curiosity, compassion, confidence, clarity. They don't need to be told, you're fine, you're fine. They don't need to be told, go eat a s'more, They don't need to be told, get on YouTube. They need that connection. We do that for our children. I do that for my son. Why wouldn't I do that for myself?
Can you walk us through what that would look like in practice? Let's say for something like numbing with scrolling. Like we've had a hard, long day. Mm-hmm. We don't want to just be like sitting there scrolling on our phones, but we can't put our phones down.
Well, there's some patterns and behaviors that you just have to identify. Is this extreme or is this just like, a habit that I'm just like leading into it? So let's imagine it's extreme and we're just like doom scrolling or we're checking out scrolling. The moment that you have a little bit of awareness of it, the moment of just recognizing that the stimulus of I don't feel good and the response, which is I'm going to pick up the phone and just start scrolling, if you can have a little bit of space in between where you just are, or in the midst of it, and you're like, oh, this is my thing again. Why am I here? Or I'm at the refrigerator just binging or whatever it might be. When you catch yourself, you would make the commitment, I'm going to check in. And that's the first step, is the choice to check in. So for instance, for me, it's like if I'm flooded with emotions when I'm fighting with my husband. Right now, I've done this practice so much that I could actually step away and I could go to the bathroom and say, I'm going to go check in and come back to this conversation. Or you were scrolling, I'm going to check in. What you would do next is just focus your attention inward, put down the phone, walk away from the fight, whatever it is. Focus your attention inward. Offer that curiosity. Okay, where is it in my body? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? What does it feel like? What do I know about it? And get some information. How long has it been around? Does it have any images or thoughts or sensations? And these parts will be like, I'm the little girl with my pigtails and they're being pulled and I want them to be straight. That's my controller part. She's very young. The third step is compassionate connection. And you just say, what do you need? And these parts of us are so young, they're going to say, I need to relax. I need to rest. I need to play. I need to breathe. And then you'll check again for those qualities of self that come through.
I want to troubleshoot some of the issues that I can foresee myself running into. Let's start with the first one. I check in. I'm supposed to be like, where do I feel this in my body? This is something I run into in therapy so much. I feel stuff in my chest, like basically between my sternum and my chin is where I feel everything. I'm like, is that just where I can draw my attention? They're like, where do you feel your anxiety? I'm like, right here. They're like, where do you feel your love? I'm like, right here. And I'm like, am I doing this right? What if we don't feel it in our body?
Well, I think that some people will experience things visually. People will experience it somatically. Some people will experience it sort of emotionally.
Okay.
So there's no right or wrong. I think Dick actually can't see imagery I think it's a specific thing. It's interesting. He can't see like a visual inside, right? But he can connect to the body. So it doesn't really, however you get access.
Okay.
It's about getting access.
And do you have any advice for somebody who's trying to get access and is finding that hard, who feels disconnected from their body, from their thoughts, from their visions?
Absolutely. There's a chapter in the book called Let It Out, and it's about journaling with the part. So this is where you would actually just interview the part through a journaling practice of just letting it out. So you start at the top of the page. I'm going to choose to check in. Curiosity. Okay, where is this in my body, or what do I know about this? Asking questions. And you would just free write, because sometimes when we just get out of the sort of inner reflection and onto the page, and you follow those 4 steps with a journaling practice, that will open you up to receive some information that you might not get otherwise. I also combine the 4 steps with prayer throughout the book, because sometimes you may not have access, but you have a prayer. In any moment, we can pray to choose to turn inward, or we can pray to choose again. Or I've offered the practice connected to meditation. It's a real beautiful thing to just say, 4 steps.
What about if we're trying to get curious and we can't bring it back to anything from our childhood? We can't kind of connect with that childlike self. We're like, I was pretty happy as a kid. I don't know where this is coming from.
You don't have to go date it back. You just date it to where it is in this moment, whether it's in the past or it's in the present. It's a young part. And you don't have to overthink it. Just check in. Is there an emotion? Is there a feeling? Is there a thought attached to us? Maybe the thought is like, I'm angry, or I hate my job, or it could be very present moment. Don't overthink it too much. There's no right or wrong way. If you follow the steps, the parts will reveal their message to you.
And then what if we feel like we don't have access to the thing that we feel like we would really need? So maybe we uncover, oh, wow, I feel really lonely, but we don't feel like we have access to the relationships that would make us not feel lonely. So then we're like, well, should I just go back to eating the chocolate, scrolling on social media?
Yeah, so Dick Schwartz always says, you are the one you've been waiting for. He wrote a book about this. And the self-energy that emerges when you practice these steps, or you're in an IFS therapy session, or you're doing it as self-help, the self-energy that emerges replaces that belief that you need something outside of yourself. And I can testify to that. I can testify that now I know and trust self. I trust that there is a inner healer inside of me. I know I always have a place to go. I know that no matter what, I can access safety. And of course, there's times when it's much easier than others, but I know it's there and I believe in it.
So when we're checking in, it's not going to be like, I need to be on a yacht. I need to be surrounded by this great friend group. It's, what qualities do I possess that I need that I can give myself?
Yeah, and don't judge what you hear you need. It's going to say whatever it thinks it needs, right? But I think that often what you're really going to hear is, I need love. I need calm. I need to play. I need to be creative. These parts of us are young, so they need to get back to their young roles. They need to be a child again. They need innocence. They need safety. They need freedom. They need calmness. They need connection. They need self.
And you said you now trust you have all of these C qualities. I struggle sometimes with trusting that I have this like wise self inside of me. Do you have any advice for how we can begin to believe we contain all these things?
The last chapter of the book is called Self-Trust. And the reality is that we all have self. But there's a beautiful Stephen Krenz quote that self is like the sun behind the clouds. And when the clouds are there, you can't see the self. But when you release the clouds, the presence of the sun energy of self can emerge naturally. So we have this ever-present energy. We all have it. It's all inside of us. We all have it. We've blocked it based on the protection mechanisms, which are the clouds. The more that we choose to check in and have the subtle adjustment the tiniest molecule of self. Today, if we do it together, if you do it later tonight, if you feel a molecule of self, that's enough for today. Tomorrow, another molecule of self. You add up these little moments, these little sparks of light, and then the light begins to emerge larger and larger. Any spiritual practice is about letting that light in, but you're not going to rip off the Band-Aid. And I remember this metaphor I heard a metaphysical teacher talk about once, that it's almost like we're all sitting in this dark room and our hands are over our eyes and we're screaming, it's so dark in here, it's so dark in here, it's so dark in here. But all we have to do is lift our hands and remember that we're in the light. And so this is a process of gently lifting your hands to reveal the light.
That's why it can be hard to start, though, I think, because starting is almost like plunging into the lake that you can't see the bottom of or something. And then you jump in and you realize you can swim and it's beautiful and it's this whole new perspective. But that initial jump, I think, is really, really difficult. And I think a lot of people aren't making it, myself often included. I mean, you can look around and see the state of the world right now, you know? Why do you think we're hesitant to jump in or to begin to peel our hands off our eyes?
We have grown to rely heavily on our protection mechanisms because since we were very young, that's how we survived. Control was the way I survived. And when I say survived, stayed safe from the impermissible emotions. And so now in this tumultuous time that we're living in and we're getting activated and we're getting very triggered often, we're in even more protector mode than we've ever been in because we're trying to maintain and manage the core feelings of fear. So what's required for us to survive and thrive these times, I know this and I mean this, is to have a relationship inside and is to have access and connection to these parts of ourselves. But like any kind of trauma work, you don't want to rip off the Band-Aid. You need to titrate in a little and then you just back right out and you go back to your news or you go back to your YouTube or you go back to your whatever you need, right? And that's one of the things I think that's so beautiful about this is that these parts have an important role. They've kept you safe. I can look at my cocaine addict and say, oh, honey, you did a good job. You did what you needed to do. You were trying to keep me safe. The workaholic, you were trying to keep me safe. I can look at those parts and I have forgiveness for them and I have compassion for them and I recognize the role that they played at that time and I can see them now as different and new because I've helped them heal. So it's not about trying to stop the pattern. It's about befriending it. And the beautiful thing about that is that it takes the pressure off the starting. It doesn't have to be so heavy. You could just test drive it for a minute a day. That's actually my prescription to people. Okay. 1 minute a day. Maybe you feel more comfortable journaling. Maybe you feel more comfortable tuning in somatically, or maybe you feel more comfortable through a meditation. That's why it's all revealed in the book. And there's resources where I give like meditations guiding you to do it, which I think is going to be really helpful for people. And the method is designed to just be done. I mean, ideally you'd be doing it all throughout the day, but just to start once a day, 1 minute. If you can even just begin by reading the book or listening to the book, that in itself actually is an act of connecting to self because it's redirecting your focus. It's helping you choose again. It's helping you have a shift in your perception. And from the metaphysical standpoint, the shift in perception is a miracle.
Do you ever find yourself almost, I guess they are protector parts, but there's like, I've been in a period of grief recently, and I've been listening to Anderson Cooper's podcast. Yeah. And he talks a lot, which is a wonderful, wonderful.
He's extraordinary.
He's extraordinary. And the podcast is called All There Is. I highly recommend it. But he says that he really attributes his success in life to never dealing with his grief, essentially. He felt pushed to go to these war zones, to be this hugely successful journalist because he was essentially unhealed. Do you ever run into people who feel that healing will make them lose their superpowers?
Yeah, in the book I talk about how we often think that if we heal these parts of ourselves, because they have two roles, right? Sometimes they're extreme in one way, but they're also very magical in others, right? My controller wrote 10 books in 14 years.
Yeah.
She's had a really important role in the world. It's not that I want to stop her from being present. I don't want to get rid of the controller. I just want her to be able to do her great work in less extreme ways. I don't want her to feel safe in doing it. So to Anderson's point, his protector has been his greatest virtue career-wise. But it's also, I'm sure, has come with a lot of consequences and a lot of other issues, right? Relationships, whatever. I'm not going to speak for him. But the beauty is that we can have this perspective of these parts and see them through this lens of, oh, wow, you've done really good work. And I can see how hard it was for you to do that. So I'm going to applaud the greatness, but I'm also going to recognize it hasn't really been an easy road. And so if I can help you really, you don't have to lose your edge, you can soften your edges. So right now, I have worked with the controller. And right now, she's in a place of real recovery. She's really trusting self. And so that part of me inside is now in this new phase, in this new year, saying, we're going to do less this year. And I am not going to try to force all the things that I need to do to get this book out to the world. I'm going to just continue to say yes and be intuitive and listen. And maybe I won't fly out to LA next week to do that big podcast because I just, traveled for 2 weeks, and maybe I'll let it happen in May. And it doesn't mean that you stop doing what you're doing. You just do it in less extreme ways. And the miracle of that is that, we can really do less and attract more in all areas. And my prayer for Anderson is that this type of work and his healing and of his grief and his ability to dissociate, which is really what that protector is to be in these horrific areas and dissociate, is a gift. Mm-hmm. But my prayer for him is that he can use that, and then he can also have more access to self as well.
Can you speak about how this work has impacted you as a parent and how you as a parent has impacted this work for you?
It's the greatest gift as a parent, first by really reparenting myself, because my son has grown up seeing me in very distressed states from a very young age. So when he was 4 months old, I was hit with extreme suicidal postpartum depression. So he probably has fragmented memories of me falling to the floor, screaming, I want to die, literally. That's where it took me. I think that instead of just being I just fucked up my kid, I can now show him today that mommy is resilient, that mommy is safe. And I can speak to him in those ways. So when I was having other meltdowns recently, as I started to heal this part, the controller part was really healed in the past, really big healing in the past year. But with that came a lot of meltdowns. And I was able to speak. My son started to me Mommy, being a speaker and author is not good. And I was like, why? And he's like, because it makes you lose your brain. Because I kept saying this, I'm melting down. I'm my brain is broken. And he heard that, right? And so instead of being oh no, mommy's fine, just shutting that down, I did the steps with him, and I said, oh yeah, let's check in about that. So let's get curious. What did it feel like when you heard mommy say that? And yeah, mommy felt XYZ, and mommy was going through a lot of, working through a lot of big feelings. And what does that feel like for you? And getting curious about that and giving him the space to talk about it. And then compassionately connecting. What do you need now that we're now connecting about it? And, maybe he would be able to answer, maybe he wouldn't, but he knows that he's not being dismissed in that emotion. And he knows that I see him. And he knows also that there's conversation around this, and that there's clarity, and that I'm resilient, and that I can repair, and that I'm not dismissing or shutting down his experience. Because that's a trauma wound, right? Having that childhood, very young wound, and then seeing mommy break down at other moments, and it's big. And so the only way that I know how to parent is to repair on a moment-to-moment basis and to offer clarity. Even going through perimenopause recently, I had part of my rough year of melting down was the hormonal meltdown. So when he'd hear me my brain is breaking, or that was his language. It was because I was losing all my hormones. Everything just was tanking. So my brain was breaking, truly. And so I actually said to my 6-year-old child, mommy had hormonal changes that made her very emotional. And now I'm patched up and I've got the medicine that makes me feel really good. My husband and my son's nanny were looking at me what the fuck is she talking about? Why is she saying this? Almost like it was bad to speak to him like that. And I was like, nah. I am going to explain to this young man that at a very young age that women have these experiences, and that they're real, and that they're not to be shut down or shamed, and that there's help and there's hope, but they're also the experience of being a woman. And so hopefully one day when his wife is going through perimenopause, he can say, oh yeah, my mom went through that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into that. Like I do think some of the big work being done in society right now is raising boys. Like I feel like we've done a really good job of raising incredibly strong, powerful women, and now we need to raise men who will rise to the occasion of that.
Yeah, I had a beautiful opportunity to do a circle at Gloria Steinem's house in Manhattan, and it was just like 6 of us. And I said to Gloria, wow, like our rights are gone, and we're in this horrific place as women. What do we do? And she looked at me and she said, raise feminist boys.
Yeah, 100%. I also love about what you said that you showed your son your pain. I think a lot of damage is actually done when parents either mask their pain completely and try to be like, oh, I'm perfect, let me show you this, or they just show the pain and then they don't show the healing part of it. And I think both of those parts are so, so important.
Yeah, the secret to good parenting is the repair. And what a repair really is clarity. Because a little kid in moments of mom melting down or dad and mom fighting, they don't understand that. So when you can offer them the clarity, mommies and daddies fight and they make up. Or mommy had hormonal feelings and mommy got patched up, right? So he remembers these things. He will really take it in and internalize it and recognize it and remember it.
This is maybe off topic, but what if there's not like a repair? Like what if your kid comes to you and is like, I'm scared because there's school shootings, or I'm scared because there seems to be all this scary news about fires and hurricanes and stuff like that. And
you validate their experience.
Okay.
You do the 4 steps with them. You ask them, would you like to check in about that? And obviously, if they're coming to you, they're almost choosing to check in anyway. Second step, I like to actually check in, and I try to be very neutral with the way I speak. So it's not like mommy voice, I'll be like, I like to, or empathize, like, oh, when I have big feelings like that, or I have those feelings too. And what I do is I like to ask questions to the feelings, Ollie. And I'll say, oh, okay, so let's ask some questions. And we do it all like a game, okay, well, where do you feel it in your body? And what do you know about that feeling? And is there anything it wants to tell mommy? And like, what does it need right now? And I just go through the steps. If I do it in like a neutral, kind of natural, empathetic way, it works. Instead of being like, we're going to do the 4 steps right now. My kid's smart. He knows when mom goes into self-help mode, and he's like, nah.
So they're so humbling, the children.
They are our best teachers, our greatest teachers.
It's actually interesting because it's not just kids going through this right now. My dad is doing free therapy for victims of the LA fires right now. And he says that something that is the most consistent thing coming up in every single session that he's doing is anger, that this is the state of the world and that people don't have the power to change it, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about the government, whether it's about financial circumstances. I think there is just this, whether it's about the LA fires or just in a larger sense, this anger of the world isn't going in the direction that I want it to go, and I'm powerless to change the direction the world is going. Whether it's through this work or through any of the other amazing work that you do, would you have advice for people who feel that way?
While I'm not a victim in this moment of a fire like this, I am aware of the feelings of powerlessness given. And again, that's easier when you're not in an extreme acute situation. But I think we're all experiencing feelings of powerlessness. Most people are. And the reality is that we have to, and it's going to sound like a real, like, nice spiritual answer, thanks, self-help book author. But the reality is that the only real power that we have is our power of inner choice. Because the real power we have is the way that we choose to perceive a situation, particularly in moments when everything has been taken away. So God bless your father in this trauma he's going through. He may not have the power to say everything's going to be fine. No, of course not. He's literally living in one of the biggest tragedies of this nation. But what he can do is say, I choose to go to therapy today.
He's doing the therapy.
Yeah. Oh, he's the therapist.
Yeah. So he's been so wonderful, and he's just like offered. I posted it online. And so he's got all these sessions filled. And so he's doing free therapy. He did work with the Red Cross after 9/11 and Katrina. So he's trained in trauma therapy. But
I just got chills. I love that.
It's so cool. He always talks about like, what is your greatest good in the Aristotelian sense? He would always say, like, Aristotle would say, like, what's your greatest good you can offer the world? And I feel like right now my dad's very much doing that.
I love your dad.
Yeah.
So for him and his patients, I think that the people that are in these moments of being the victim, genuinely, really, I mean, it's like everything's taken away. It's actually like a big question I get a lot. It's like, when you're in a war zone or if you have lost everything, how do you choose again? The best way I can answer it is to just go back to the heroes that we've known before. Right? So Viktor Frankl, how did he survive the Holocaust? His mind. It's in those most extreme moments, not that we override or deny or ignore reality, but we choose the lens with which we're going to see it through. Am I going to see this through the lens of possibility, or am I going to see this through the lens of despair? And sometimes all you have in those moments is the lens of you have those two choices, but the lens of possibility could just be, today I'm going to volunteer and be in service because that will put me into the seat of feeling okay. Or today I have my therapy session, I'm going to focus on that. And of course, this becomes more and more of a extreme conversation when you're talking about, what's going on in Gaza or something, but even in moments like in places like that, it's the creative possibilities. How am I going to see my way into the next right action? And it's a rough one to talk about when people are just completely assaulted. It's hard to sort of give people the moment of how you're going to choose to live through this. When you do think back to heroes like a Viktor Frankl in the most dire circumstances of living in a concentration camp, you can see how thinking your way through it and having a perspective of possibility is real.
What about people who are 1, 2, several steps removed, where we're just like seeing this stuff on our social media, seeing it on the news, and just feeling like a sense of hopelessness about everything? We just feel like it's like trauma after trauma after trauma. I've seen like the memes, like, we're ready for precedented times, and I think that's a real sense for a lot of people.
I got to be honest, I don't know that the times are getting better. I think that the resilience has to get stronger. I think that this is a time of radical awakening. It is a time where it is required to have an inner practice. It's required. Many miracles can come from that, because sometimes when the safeties of the world are dismantled, we have to find that safety inside. It's not what people want to hear, but it's the reality of where we're at. It's given me a very strong, grounded connection to my purpose, and I'm sure for yourself as well, to be a messenger in whatever form that comes. And that's for the individual too. You don't have to have a platform to be the messenger. You may be listening to this podcast regularly and learning a lot. And so what are you going to do with those tools? Use them, apply them, share them, be the light. It's required right now.
Well, God, every single one of us touches so many people every single day, whether it's the people we walk by on our commute, whether it's our kids, whether it's our partner, whether it's our parents, our friends. Like, we all have so much power and influence that I feel like we're not even always consciously aware of.
I had this conversation last night with my audience in San Francisco. I had this conversation with 1,000 people last night where I looked at them and broke down to them my feelings about kindness right now. The best thing we can do in this tumultuous time is to practice kindness really actively, recognizing the humanness, speaking kind words, showing up with a positive attitude, repairing when you notice you've been unkind. The kindness of a stranger, right? So acknowledging that I could shake someone's hand or I could give them a hug. This might sound, whatever, everyone talks about kindness. I'm actually really talking about kindness, really taking in the power of what that means and how your one act of kindness could change someone's entire life. Yeah. It's no small thing.
It makes me think about, have you heard about the Gottman's research You need 5 positive interactions in a relationship to override 1 negative one. So you need this like 5-to-1 ratio.
It's so true. It's so true.
I think about that with we're having so many negative interactions via seeing the stuff on social media that's designed to cultivate outrage, whether it's the bombardment of news that our brains were just never designed for that level of exposure. We have so much more negative than we ever have, I think, historically. So we need more of these little moments of kindness to begin to tip those scales.
I think that's perfectly said. Perfectly said. We have so much negative that we need to activate the positive. We need to proactively commit to the kindness to cast out the fear of what we're seeing and assaulted with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have a few kind of specific scenarios. I would love for you to share how the 4-step check-in process could maybe work for.
Yeah.
Let's do, what if we hate our body or our appearance? And this could be like the shape of our body. It could also be aging, which women are very much not allowed to do. How would this process work in that scenario?
Checking in with the body the same way you would check in with the anxiety, or checking in with pain, or checking in with the belief of your appearance. So if you find yourself in a attack thought that's reoccurring of I'm not good enough, or my body's not good enough, or I'm aging, you would check in with it. And you would offer it the attention, the curiosity, and the compassionate connection. What will happen in those 4 steps when it's specific to your body is no different than what it would happen if it was specific to an old belief or pattern. You'll give it attention, you'll give it voice, and instead of checking out from it and just going into judgment, which is really the checkout for physical stuff, just like instead of checking in and establishing compassionate connection, we would just judge. Right? So that's the checkout. You would check in and that judgment could be released, and the compassion could emerge. And that compassion would put you in a place of acceptance and self-love, and out of a place of self-attack.
So can those core beliefs sort of come from society at large versus our childhood?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
All over the place.
Okay.
They start at the childhood, and then they're sort of repurposed, replayed, and recycled.
Because I remember a time when I was like excited about aging, and then I feel like I've had thousands of people in thousands of ways tell me that's not allowed for myself, and now it's something I really struggle with.
Yeah. Aging is a weird one. Aging, I mean, turning 45 was strange. It's like, oh, you're getting close to 50. It's a weird thing. I think the beautiful thing that I will say, though, about aging is that now particularly as women, now with so much more information about menopause and perimenopause, and recognizing this supportive hormone replacement therapy, which is, in my opinion, really, really important if you can take it, if you're qualify for it. When you say qualify, it's like often if you have like breast cancer history or have cancer, it's sometimes harder to get on HRT, but there's still possibilities. When you educate yourself on the hormonal support, the thing for me is like I started to see myself just sort of like age very quickly in this perimenopause period, skin elasticity, just like, keeping on muscle. And then when I got educated and I started getting myself the support of the estrogen and the progesterone, and I started actively exercising, like lifting heavy weights. For me, I'm, a 110-pound girl. I'm lifting 15 pounds. That's a lot for me. But doing multiple reps daily of like really physical weightlifting, eating protein, eating an anti-inflammatory diet, which I always have, but obviously being sober and not having alcohol, I've radically seen a massive transformation in my appearance, in my self-esteem, in my overall well-being. And I, in many ways, feel healthier now than I did a decade ago. So I think that with the emphasis on what we can do with exercise, food, hormone support, supplements, even medication if it's necessary, throw everything at it.
Do you feel like that fixes the psychological parts of being like, ugh, I'm not going to be 25? Like, I don't know. Like, do you fear getting older? Do you fear people perceiving you differently or interacting with you differently?
I have started to notice in the last year, I had this hairdresser that was like young and hot and cool. And he was kind of like very into like his like blonde girl. And he would like, focus on this type of girl. And I never felt good going there because I always felt like I was this like old lady. And I found myself being like, oh, well, you guys are so young. Like maybe they're like 6 years younger than I am. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or 8 years younger than I am. Be like, oh, well, because they're not 40 yet. I'd be like, oh, well, you guys are so young, or you guys. And I was saying these things that were sort of like self-deprecating and like, oh, well, now I've got gray hair, or like, I was like, fuck that. And you know what I did? I just changed my fucking hairdresser.
I love that. I love that. It's on, you know what? You hear these women, Wiser Than Me is one of my favorite podcasts with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And you hear these women say that they feel like they have so much stronger like sense that their life gets better as they get older. And I wonder if a huge part of that is just like, they're like, wait, it might not be me. It could just be the situation. And I just need to change the situation.
100%. Like, go be around the people that make you feel good, right? Like, undo the things that make you feel good. For me, it's been a true gift to be able to, I have more hormones in my body right now than I did at 35 when I was going into perimenopause. I have more balance hormonally being on hormone replacement therapy and having a little bit of estrogen and a little bit of progesterone. I am more balanced. I actually have, my hair is more luscious. My elasticity of my skin is getting better. I am doing the self-care things that I can do. And listen, not everybody has the privilege to have the access to the doctors that I've had, but there are things like MIDI Health, which I'll shout out, organizations that will help women. And there is support out there for women that we deserve and we need.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my therapist who's in her 70s, and she looks incredible. And she's on HRT still. I don't know if you're supposed to be on it that long, but she's still on it. And she's like, oh, I love my hormones. You know what I mean? And she's just juicy, and she's got a sex drive, and she's, you know what I mean? It's like fucking awesome. Like,
well, and I think that is so, you even having that therapist. So we had Dr. Becca Levy on the podcast. She's a Yale researcher, and her research shows that we can add 7.5 literal years to our life if we have positive aging beliefs. And the number one way to have positive aging beliefs is to have role models.
Yeah.
And I do think we scroll online and see a bunch of 22-year-olds, and then we're like, it's too late. Like, I haven't gotten where I'm supposed to get in my life because we're not looking ahead of our lives. We're looking behind.
Yeah. And menopause starts, for me, it was 45. So I was on the younger side, but 45 to 55 is when you're going to menopause. And so these hormonal changes are affecting you in your 30s. And I really want you to highlight this for your sisters that are listening, because you've got 100%. People, lots of listening women, right?
100%. That actually reminds, or that we have one question here that's like, how can we use this process if we feel like we're not where we should be in terms of our lives? We feel like our finances aren't where we should be. We feel like our career isn't where it should be. We want to have a baby and we don't have a baby. We want to have a partner and we don't have a partner. How can we use this process to love that part of our lives or ourselves?
Well, it sounds like there's a belief that I'm not where I should be. So check in with the belief that I'm not where I should be. A woman last night at my talk asked, I'm not in a relationship and I just feel like there's nobody out there for me. And I just went a little bit deeper and I said, what's the core belief that's blocking you from that relationship? And she sort of gave me a BS answer. And I said, okay, let's ask one more time. Is there another belief that's blocking you from, because she kept saying, oh, well, none of the guys are doing the work. And I said, was there another belief there? And she said, well, that I'm afraid of getting hurt. I said, okay, well, we attract who we are. We attract what we believe. We manifest what we believe. So if you believe that there's fear of being hurt, then you're going to keep manifesting and attracting people that you'd identify as not doing the work, people that could potentially hurt you that don't seem like the right person. So the work there in that moment was to help her redirect and recognize that the check-in was for the part that believes not that I can't have the partner, but the part that believes that I'm going to get hurt.
So a big part of it is like, where are you actually getting stuck? Can we identify that?
Yeah, and in the case of someone that's thinking like all the time, like, I'm behind, you can just check in with that belief, turn your attention inward, become curious about that belief. And these parts are protecting other parts. So as you start to check in with that part, another part can be revealed. And you can then check in with that. It's like the layers of the onion. So you just start to work and tease out and focus and get more connected to the parts.
And if those aren't emerging, that's where the journaling, the meditation, all the things.
The journaling is, I think, the best way for so many listeners. Just get into the journal and follow the steps.
What if we are on the other side of some sort of rejection? Like we've had a job loss, we've gone through a hard breakup. How can this work in that type of circumstance?
Well, oftentimes on the other side of rejection, we're being triggered. There's a trigger there. So check in with the trigger. So the feeling of inadequacy, the feeling of rage, the feeling, just check in with the response, with the emotional state.
How does this work for addiction? Because you have such strong backgrounds in both of these things.
Huge. When I was writing this book, I was actually working as a fellow at a recovery center near my home. And I had the privilege of being able every month to meet with 100 or more brand new sober people, because it was like a 21-day program. So each month there was a whole new group. And I workshopped this material with that group of people. what the biggest thing was helping the addicts recognize that the addict part had been actually trying to protect them. Because usually as an addict, we want to shame the parts of us that are addicted. I'd say to the group, and I'd say, how many people in this room experienced some kind of adverse trauma as a child? Every hand would go up. And then I said, well, how did that feel? And they'd say terror, fear, trauma, exile, blah, blah. They would just throw out the words. And I'd say, well, wouldn't it make sense that you would do whatever it took to put out the flames of that fire, of that inner fear? And they'd be like, yeah. I said, so then wouldn't it make sense that you would go to any length, even a destructive length, like using, to put out those flames? And many of them would say, yeah. So can we have a little compassion in this moment for the parts of you that have been working so hard, so hard to put those flames out?
I want to cry. The sense of palpable physical relief I feel in just like that level of understanding and forgiveness is wild. I mean, to be in that room must have felt crazy.
And we were in it together, right? A group of addicts. We were all recognizing that for ourselves.
So that would be the first step for maybe somebody listening who's struggling with addiction and trying to see how this all fits in, is recognizing that those are your protector parts. Like those.
Just even seeing the addict as a protector part is healing.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, let's do two more. Let's do, what if we're struggling with chronic health issues, like the type that's not going to go away?
Some of the work of Dr. John Sarno, who wrote the book Healing Back Pain, and spoke about how physical pain and things like fibromyalgia and things, these chronic pain or chronic illness are often, while they are real conditions and you have diagnoses and you need medical support, they are often forms of they're protectors because they're often ways of numbing and avoiding or protecting against the impermissible rage, fears, feelings of inadequacy, the exiled parts. And so when you check in with the body parts, then the body parts start to reveal what they, who they are, how old they are, what happened, whatever they want you to know. They reveal what they need, and you offer them that self-connection. You feel instant relief.
We had Dr. Rachel Zoffness on the podcast, and she's a pain expert.
Rachel and I went to high school together.
No, you didn't?
Yeah.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That is so random.
It's so random. I have to talk to her.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
too funny.
I also feel like, did you go to high school with Ellen Vora? She's a dear friend of mine, and I just remember that as you said.
Yeah.
What was this high school?
I know. It was like me and Ellen and Rachel. I know. There's a lot of us that just came out of the school. Isn't that funny? Yeah.
That's so interesting. Well, she says that pain is always bio, psycho, and social. So pain always has a biological component, but it also has a social component, and it also has the psychological component. And when we only talk about the biological, we're missing these two other really key parts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And most medical doctors have not been trained how to think about the psychosomatic effects of trauma or,
100%.
When was your last time your doctor was like, so what happened to you as a child?
Yeah.
Like if you're an OBGYN, like that has to be question number one. If a woman's coming in with chronic pelvic pain, or if you're, if you're a gastro doctor, like that has to be question number one.
Yeah. And it's question number zero. Like
zero.
It never happens.
Zero.
Yeah. Okay. Let's end on, what if somebody's listening and their core belief is, I cannot change. Like this stuff works for other people, but it's not going to work for me.
I don't think that person's still listening to this podcast right now.
I actually disagree, because it's a belief I struggle with. I struggle with believing in my ability to change. I think I have a core belief that I can help other people, but I can't change myself. And I struggle with that. I
think that you can have that. I think you may have that belief, and people listening may have that belief. But I don't think you would be doing the work that you do. I don't think you'd be in conversation with me if you didn't believe that there is possibility of healing.
So why am I telling myself I have that belief?
Well, it's a protector, right? Because if I say, it's never going to happen for me, then I don't have to ever face the trauma of it not happening, or the grief of feeling like I didn't make it work. And the desire, you have the desire to heal, which keeps you in the seat of this curiosity. Because really, what is a podcast host? It's a great podcast host, which you are, is extraordinary, is curious. And so your curiosity is self. So you've got that self energy of curiosity keeping you in this conversations with Ellen, conversations with me, conversations with Rachel's office, just that dialogue. Okay, so you're in that curiosity seat. And then there's the protector that's like, too good to be true, can't happen for me. These two things can coexist. So what is the work here? The work is to heighten the expansiveness of self inside. And as self becomes more magnetic and magnified in your inner system, you have less faith in the fear and more faith in the light. And so it's not overnight going to be gone. It's a slow release. It's a slow adjustment. And it's witnessing with compassion the parts of yourself that are in disbelief. One check-in at a time with that part.
Yeah. That was going to be my last question, but I do have to ask now. Faith is also something I really struggle with. I want to be more spiritual than I am. If somebody struggles with faith, they struggle with believing in the unknown, they struggle with all of those types of things. Do you have any advice for beginning to bring that into their lives?
Well, first, have you read my book, The Universe Has Your Back?
Yes, but like a very long time ago.
So I'll make sure I get you another copy
Yeah.
because the subtitle is Transform Fear into Faith. I think that the reason that is my most popular book is because in the passages of that book, there's this experience that someone has of remembering. And so the faith is like self. It's inside. It's in you. But the world that we live in, the protectors that we've experienced are like these bricks that we've built up against that presence, that self inside. And so when we start to read or learn or just even experience the transmission of energy of somebody else speaking on behalf of the divine, speaking on behalf of faith, it starts to spark that remembrance inside of ourselves. And that starts to dismantle those bricks of the wall. So I can't force you to have faith, but I can tell you the story. I can remind you and help you recognize your faith in mine. In IFS, it's called being a hope merchant. So you might not have the hope today, but I can be the hope for you. And so it is my prayer that you, whether it's that book or any spiritual text, that you just start to get curious with that, open your heart to it, read about it, because what will happen is you'll have moments of remembrance. And that, again, it's the same, adding up. Spiritual faith and self are the same thing.
It's also so interesting because I'm sitting here and I'm like, do I have all these self qualities? And you're like, well, here you are being curious. Like, it is like, it's like, how can we wake up to just the awareness that we have these things, that we possess them? We're showing them all the time.
When you start to just have the 4-step check-in and you start to get that sort of relationship inside, instead of judging yourself, you relate to yourself and to these parts of yourself. And you start to have that relationship inside, you start noticing more self. That's why that 4th step is the most important, because you check for the C's and you're like, oh, wow, I do have a little bit of curiosity, or I have some compassion. And then you celebrate those molecules of self. And as you start to see more and more of them expand, it becomes more and more natural.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. I ask guests always to leave us with one homework assignment, something we can do as soon as we turn off the podcast to begin to see these changes in our life. I feel like it's going to be the 4-step check-in.
1 minute of the 4-step check-in.
Yeah.
1 minute a day.
And can you just remind us really fast the steps?
Yep. Step 1, choose to check in with the feeling, the belief, the protection mechanism. Choose to check in instead of check out. So focus your attention inside. Step 2, you become curious. Where is it in your body? What do you know about it? Are there any thoughts or feelings or sensations attached to it? Step 3, compassionate connection. What do you need? Asking the part, what do you need? And step 4, check for self. Do I feel calm? Do I feel connected? Do I have some clarity? Do I feel some courage come through?
And it's there. It's there.
It will always be revealed.
Even if you don't believe it's there, it's there. I love that. Thank you so much, Gabby. Can you tell us a little bit in your own words about your beautiful book, your app, anything else you want to highlight?
Yeah, my intention is to help people crack open to self, to the spiritual relationship inside. Whether that be through listening to us today, whether that be through a book of mine, whether that be through my Gabby coaching membership app, however that, or the free meditation, my Instagram account. I don't care how I touch you and how I serve you. I just hope I can. So the resources are all obviously online. DearGabby.com, Gabby Bernstein on Instagram. The book is called Self-Help. This is your chance to change your life.
It's such a clever title because it's referencing the self of IFS, which also must be crazy to look back at your old books, like you were saying, and see the IFS stuff kind of weaving through when you didn't even know it was that yet.
I didn't even know.
That's so crazy. But it's such an iconic title, but it's referencing such a specific thing in this modality.
It has a meaning.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, thank you so much, Gabby. I love this conversation.
Was an excellent conversation. I want to thank the self quality that is so vibrant in you, which is your curiosity, because this has been one of my favorite interviews. And that is the key to why this is so successful, is that curiosity.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. I take that in. Unfortunately, that is all for this episode of the Liz Moody Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, I would so appreciate if you would share it with somebody that you think would love it too. I absolutely loved Gabby's advice, and I think it's exactly what a lot of us need to hear right now. So grab the link to the episode and text somebody. Sharing is the top way to support the podcast, and it's also a really great way to help the people that you love. And make sure that you are following the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or on YouTube, because in our next episode, we are doing a deep dive into the health benefits and risks of cannabis, which is a highly requested episode. And then after that, we have an advice episode where we get into fertility and grief and a lot more, but in a very humor and heart-filled way. Following the podcast means that the episodes will show up right in your feed and you will never miss an episode. And now you can watch full video episodes on YouTube and on Spotify. So if you're watching over there, hello, it's good to see you. It's fun to be in person on video. And remember to head over to lizmoody.substack.com to sign up for our newsletter, The Takeaway. You're going to get key action steps for every single podcast episode, plus a ton of bonus content. You can also come hang out on Instagram. I am at Liz Moody. I share tons of inspiring and always very real content and exactly how I am using everything that we learn on the podcast in my real life. Okay, I love you, and I will see you on the next episode of the Liz Moody Podcast. Oh, just one more thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, a psychotherapist, or any other qualified professional.